Hey, have you heard any good books lately? This is Talking Audiobooks, your weekly podcast for all news, discussion, and opinions surrounding the wonderful world of audiobooks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you are, whenever you may be listening. This is the Talking Audiobooks podcast, season number 2, episode number 6. I am your host, the man with the face made for radio and the voice made for print, Casey Trowbridge, and I am so happy to be with you. We have quite the episode for you this week on Talking Audiobooks. As you listen to this, hopefully it is June 30th when you hear this. I would like to think that you're all breathlessly waiting for each new episode every week, and you listen to them as soon as they hit the RSS feed. And if you do, that means you're listening to this on June 30th, which means it's the last day of June as audiobook month. And you know, it's been quite the month. Of course, when Ken asked me to take over as host of this podcast, and when I say asked me, I really mean begged, but, you know, we'll just let that go. I'll let him keep a little bit of his dignity, but just a little. Anyway, when he insisted that I take over as host of the Talking Audiobooks podcast, I mean, there were some bribes involved too, but, you know, that's for a different time. I wanted to start it on June the 1st, or as close to June 1st as I could get, because I wanted to time the podcast release with myself as host to audiobook month, because I thought, well, there will be things to talk about. There will be sales and there'll be giveaways and there'll be a lot going on. And so I thought the fact that we can do this in June, and June is audiobook month, it just seemed too good an opportunity to pass up. And I think that as this show plays out going forward, I think I will be proven to be right about that. I think that my instincts on that will eventually prove to be correct if they haven't already been. And, you know, I've now hosted 5 of these, so Ken and I are no longer tied. I've now hosted more of these episodes than he has, and it's been quite the experience for me so far. I'm having a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot. There's some challenges that have come up, and some of them have been beaten back, and some of them are to be addressed in the future. And we have a lot of things coming up. As I mentioned last week, we're laying the groundwork for interviews. Our first book club episode, probably by the time you hear this, probably won't have been taped, but the taping of that should be maybe next week or the week after. I'll have an announcement on what the July book is going to be next week as well. You can find that out on Twitter, Facebook, or Goodreads, and you'll probably find out the book club stuff before I announce it on the show, because I'll probably put it up there once we've decided, and maybe I'll even have that decision made before you hear this show, and you'll have already seen it on Twitter if you follow me there. But it's been quite the month. I want to again tell you that you should hop over to audiobooksync.com and get your free titles for this week. They went up yesterday. As you listen to this, the 29th, they'll be up through the 6th of July before they change out. So you got plenty of time to go up there and get them free books. Who doesn't like that? Summer Sync, I'm all about it. I think it's such a cool thing that they do to get teens listening during the summer months that I'm just going to plug it on the show every week. Of course, we don't have any audio bingo plugs for you this week because I finished last week, and I talked about it on last week's show. And today being June 30th, as you listen to this, it would be hard, though not impossible, for you to listen to all 9 audiobooks in a single day. But if you do want to try it, the audio bingo promo is in several of our past episodes, and you can go back and listen to it there if you don't know the spaces, or you can visit the audiobookworm.com and you can get your own audio bingo card for printing out and marking up. So that's a lot of the housekeeping things. I want to mention the fact that if you've been listening to the show since the first one that I have done, we've been talking about how you can enter to win 6 promo codes from audible.com to use on whatever you want. No purchase necessary. You know, you're not going to get signed up to any newsletters or anything, but to email feedback@talkingaudiobooks.com, and you would be entered into that drawing. That ends today, June 30th, is the last day to enter that particular giveaway. So we will be taking emails through the end of the day, and anything that comes in on July 1st or later will not be eligible, though we still encourage you to email us at that address if you have any questions, comments, feedback, topics for shows, answers to our feedback questions, whatever it may be. We still encourage you to send those emails to us at feedback@talkingaudiobooks.com, even if you're not going to be entered into the June giveaway. The winner will be informed by email, and obviously they will get their credits that way. The other thing that I wanted to mention is we'll be mentioning the winner on the show next week as well. But I want to talk about July now. I want to talk about what will happen in July. And I've settled on our giveaway for July. I figured out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And it's going to be different this month than it was in June. In June, I said, don't wait for next month. Get in on this contest, because next month we might not be giving away as many credits. We might give away something else. We might do nothing. And I said that, you know, it would be entirely up to me, and it is entirely up to me. So what we're going to do for July is, since July is the month in which the United States celebrates its independence, 241 this year, 1776 to 2017, I thought, well, that would be a good thing to base a giveaway around. So we're going to give away 241 Audible credits.
Stop it, 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 stop it!
No, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to see if Ken is paying attention as we're editing this show, or as he's editing the show, rather. I wanted to see if he actually listens. He tells me the show is good every week, but I wanted to see if he actually pays attention to what he's working on. So when I said 241, maybe he had a mild panic attack, but you know, it's okay to have those every once in a while. I don't think it'll adversely impact his ability to continue to produce this podcast. So no, we're not giving away 241 Audible credits. If we were, I would rig the contest so that I won, even though I'm not allowed to enter. But what we will do is we will give away 4 Audible credits for July the 4th, is how I came up with the number 4. Ken is probably secretly happy that America doesn't celebrate its independence on July 31st. I thought, well, we'll give away 4 because July 4th is a big deal in the United States. And what we're going to do to decide who will get the 4 credits in July, see, I told you it wasn't going to be as good as June. Listen to me when I talk, because I don't threaten, I hint. I never threaten, I just make hints. There's a big legal difference between the two. So 4 credits. And how do you enter to win these 4 credits? Well, it couldn't be any simpler than this. Go to facebook.com/talkingaudiobooks. That's all one word. That is the Facebook page for this particular show. Click the like button. And at the end of July, anyone who has liked the page previous to now and through the month of July 31st is the deadline for this. See, we put it at the end of the month. There's a method to my madness and a madness to my method. Anyone who has liked the page by the end of July 31st will be entered into a random drawing, and the winner will receive 4 credits from Audible to do with whatever they wish. They can be purchase items off your wish list. They can be stored up for a while. You can spread them out and give them to other people if you want to. But I would totally understand if you were selfish and kept them all for yourself if you won. But that's how you do it. Couldn't be any simpler. Just go to facebook.com/talkingaudiobooks and click the like button, like the page, and you will be entered into the giveaway for 4 credits from audible.com, which will be handed out at the end of July. And having said that, what I think I'm going to do right now is take a brief break. You're going to hear how you can get a free trial of Audible and help out this podcast in the process. Ken is going to tell you all about that. And then when we come back from the break, I'm going to talk about the main topic of today's show, which is what I am calling audio burnout. And what is audio burnout? Well, you're just going to have to keep listening after the break, and we will discuss it at length. So here's Ken to tell you all about audible.com, and we'll be back right after him.
For you, the listeners of the Talking Audiobooks podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/talkingaudiobooks. Again, that's audibletrial.com/talkingaudiobooks for your free audiobook. And now back to your host, Casey Trowbridge.
And we're back. Thank you, Ken, for telling us all about Audible. You know, for a guy who had a heart attack during the last segment, he sounds pretty good during that commercial. He's proving that his recovering abilities, his recuperative skills, if you will, are impressive. And we're happy that he has survived the heart attack or panic attack or whatever I caused him to suffer when I teased giving away 241 Audible credits to celebrate American independence. So, as I mentioned, the thrust of my discussion this week is going to be on audio burnout. And what do I mean by audio burnout? Well, this is the audio version of what I would call a reading slump. And the reason I call it a reading slump is because everybody calls it a reading slump, and I'm not really original. And this is what I say would be an audiobook listening slump. You're burned out on it for a little while. And the reason that I wanted to talk about it this week, there's a couple actually. The first is when Ken asked me or begged me or, forced me, it's all up to the lawyers to decide what's the right term, to do this show. I came up with a list of topics that I knew that I would want to address on episodes at one point or another. This was one of those topics because I get into these slumps every so often where I find it hard to pick a next listen, or nothing holds my interest for very long and I don't really want to listen to audiobooks. So it was a natural choice in that respect for a topic. And the other reason I picked it for this week is because I just went through this, or, hopefully by the time you hear this, I'm out of it. But if I'm not, it actually started after I finished Audio Bingo. I went and took a couple days off from audiobooks after I completed The Martian and my 9th bingo space. Took a couple days off. I wanted to catch up on my podcasts. I wanted to watch TV. I was a little stressed out. Father's Day was a little bit difficult for me this year since it was in April of 2016 that my own father passed away. And this year it seemed to hit me more than it did even last year. And so I was just kind of looking for a little bit of a break. I was tired. I hadn't slept a lot. And so I didn't want to rush into my next book. Well, I picked my next book and I chose one that we featured last week on the show, The Fall of the House of FIFA. That was one that caught my ear last week. And I started listening to it and I was doing okay. And I don't even know how it came to be this way, but I just wanted the book to end after a while. And I don't get the sense that it was because the book wasn't very good. I just wanted to be doing something else. And I probably should have started on this book later or picked a different one because I just wasn't feeling it. And I could tell it was a thing with my own mood more than the book. I thought the book was okay. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. If I read it again in the future, it won't surprise me at all to change that rating a bit and perhaps upgrade it because of my mood. But, I wasn't feeling it. I wanted to be doing something else. And maybe I should have taken more time. And a friend of mine, Amber, if you're listening, how's it going? She posted on her Facebook page an update. She hadn't updated her Facebook page in a while. And one of the things she mentioned was being in a reading slump. She was in the middle of several books and none of them were catching her attention really or holding her attention. And it just seemed like after that little tidbit, which I saw earlier today, I'm recording this on June 24th, by the way. I always like to tell you people when I'm talking to you, and so that you know what I'm actually going through at the time that I'm talking to you and at the time you're listening to it, what the relationship is there. So anyway, I saw that earlier this morning and I thought, that's a good topic. It was already one I decided on this week, but I thought I would explore it a little bit and I would make it our fan feedback. And I want to know a couple things from you, listeners to this podcast and listeners of audiobooks. I want to know, number one, how you know you're headed into a slump. And the second thing that I want to know is how you try to get out of it. And you can also tell us about how long did this type of slump last? How common are they for you? Just anything related to the topic of what happens when you get into a slump. For me, I don't know that there's any warning sign that a slump is coming. I think the best indicator of whether or not I'm going to have trouble is the mood I'm in as I finish a book. If I'm exhausted or if I'm in a grumpy mood or something like that, that's maybe a good sign that I might not want to pick my next book right away, or I don't know what to read next. I don't have enthusiasm for it, whatever it might be. My mood as I finish one book and start another one or hunt for another one is a pretty good indicator that trouble might be coming. And I wasn't feeling great after The Martian just because a lot of things were going on. And I love The Martian, so it wasn't really the book, itself that caused my mood. It was other factors, but they ended up impacting my listening choices. For me, I have something like 1,195 books in my audiobook library at the moment, and I've listened to 447 of them as I record this. So we're talking about something like 37%. So I have a pretty lengthy to be listened to list. So I I try to keep going, but sometimes I just am not feeling it and I need a break. And usually it surprises me that I would be going through this right now in this sense. We will talk about it next week, because next week will be the half year show. The year will be half over on July 2nd. I'm going to talk about my listening through the first half of the year. But the reason that a slump is sort of odd for me right now is that June is typically one of my better months for listening. It has been over the past few years, both in terms of titles I've listened to and also in terms of minutes that I spend listening each month. So usually June is a very good month for me. And it has been this year as well, thanks in part to Audio Bingo. It hasn't been as good as some of the other months of the year. I had a strong start to the year in January and February, and it's been steady since March. March, April, and May, I listen to 9 books in each of those months. June, it's tracking at 10 right now, 10 or 11 right now as I record this. Maybe more by the time you've heard this if the slump doesn't last. So it's better than some of the other months I've had this year, but my mood over the last week since I finished Audio Bingo hasn't lended itself. And I'm listening to a book right now. I'm listening to Power Down by Ben Coase. It's the first book in his Dewey Andreas series. It is narrated by Peter Herman and a production of Macmillan Audio. It's one that I just picked up recently, and I wanted to give it a shot because if anything is going to help me break through this type of slump, it's going to be a book like this, because I'm such a big fan of these, spies and the special ops guys and things like that. I like that particular genre of fiction quite a bit. So when I do get into one of these, I don't feel like listening to anything slumps, or I would rather be doing something else, then I will gravitate to something like this, try to break out of it, and hopefully I'll fall in love with a new series, and that'll help push me out of the slump as well. So that's kind of why I chose this book. It's one of the Slump Busters, I call it, and that's why I said I would like to know what you listen to try to break out of this slump. Some people don't try something new to get out of a slump like this. They just revert back and listen to an old favorite. They go back to something they know will work, something that they've enjoyed in the past, and hopefully that will re-spark their ambition to get back into reading and listening to other things that might be new. And I do that too, but I try not to go to that particular well very often, because since I have so many books on my to-be listen list, I don't like to re-listen to something very often. I think of the 77 or so books I've listened to this year, I think maybe 5 or 6 are ones that I have listened to in previous years, and the rest of them have all been new. So it's not something I like to do a lot of each year. I do some. I can understand why a person would try to end a slump by going back to something reliable, and I totally get that. So if you have something like that, I'd love to know about it. As far as the duration, last year I had a memorable one. Last year in September, I went through a slump that lasted the entire month. I only listened to one audiobook last September. It was a great book. It was a book I was looking forward to listening to, but it was the only book that I listened to all of September. And had it not come out in September, the reason that I listened to it in September is because it was released on September 16th. And I listened to it as soon as it came out. Had it not come out then, I don't think I would have listened to anything last September. And I don't really remember what it was about last September that just beat me down. The fall months are my worst months for listening. Part of that is Sundays become a non-listening day during the fall because of football season, and often Saturdays as well because of college football. That makes a big difference. But that's not enough to get it down to one. That's my worst listening month since I've kept track, going back to 2013. It was just crazy. I couldn't get into anything. I might have tried to listen to another book and stopped in the middle, but last September, I only finished the one. That was a pretty memorable one. And October improved because really it's almost impossible to do worse. You could listen to no books in a month. That's the only way it could be worse than September. So October had to be better for the most part, and it was. But it never really, I think until like December, I was down on listening, and I was in some bad shape there for a while in terms of my progress for the year. Last year, my listening actually declined from 2015, both in terms of titles listened to and minutes listening. I went from 150 in 2015 to 120 last year. I'm on a good pace to blow past 120 this year, so I've been pacing myself pretty good. I got off to a good start, as I said. January was 21 titles and February was 19. So I was off to a great start to the year, and I'm usually kind of a slow starter to start the year. I got off to a good start this year, and even though March, April, and May I didn't hit double digits, since I was so strong the first couple months, I'm still well ahead of last year's pace. I'm at 77 as I record this, books I've completed or are working on. Like I said, I'm working on one, and that's number 77. So last year there was slumps, and of course my father passing away didn't help. Although the day of his funeral, I actually started a book and I finished it the next day, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. So it wasn't something that necessarily affected me right away in terms of my listening. Although certainly the week that he passed away up until the funeral, I didn't really listen to anything. It didn't really get terrible until September, and there are other factors involved, but all that contributed to the decline over 2015, and that's the first decline I've had. I went up from 2013 to 2014, up from 2014 to 2015, and then down. And then hopefully this year will be a rebound year. So far, so good. Like I said, this has been my first sort of moody slump of the year thus far. Of course, for me now, a slump is a bad thing to have because of this show. I'm here talking about audiobooks every week. So I have to be finding things every week that I want to listen to so that I can add that particular aspect of the show each week. And I have to be listening to things so that I can talk to you about what I'm listening to. And going forward, I'm going to have to be listening to things so that I can prepare for interviews with narrators and such. So I need to be in a good frame of mind as often as it can be, and I need to nip these slumps in the bud, so to speak. I've been watching a lot of Andy Griffith while I've been taking a break from audiobooks, and nip it in the bud is, of course, a famous Barney Fife saying. But I need to nip these slumps in the bud just to keep the show going. So now that's really sort of made it a bigger sense of urgency for me, or given me a bigger sense of urgency, rather, that I need to find a way to get past this as soon as I can, because I can't really not listen to something for 2 weeks or not find things I'll be interested in listening to down the road, because I have to record a new show every week and I have to have something to tell you. It's going to be easier for me to tell you about something that I've listened to or am listening to or want to listen to than to come on here week after week and say, I'm not listening to anything. Nothing's caught my attention. My mind can't focus. My mood isn't great. That works for a show topic here and there, and I'm making the most of it now, but it doesn't work on a week-to-week basis. I cannot imagine what I would have been talking to you about last September when I wasn't listening to anything except for one book in the middle of the month. I don't know what a weekly talking audiobooks podcast would have looked like for me back then. So that's kind of my essay on audio burnout, as I call it, or a reading slump, or a listening slump. You could use any of those terms, and it would suit you well. And how I try to avoid making them prolonged. I told you about a memorable one, and how I know when one might be starting. And some people, like my friend Amber said, she's listening to or reading. In her case, it is both. She's in the middle of several books at a time, and none of them are working. I don't usually do that. At most, I will do 2 books simultaneously, but for the sake of my organizational OCD, I guess you'd call it, it's easier for me to keep track of one at a time. And so that's kind of how I listen. That's kind of my listening habits. I try to just focus on one book at a time. But maybe trying a multitude would be a better strategy to find something that would help you bust out of a slump. Because if you can get into a good listen, something that really captivates you, that's going to give you momentum into your next listen after that. It's going to make you eager to find that next book. So maybe trying multiple books at once will help you find the one that clicks and can get your momentum headed in the right direction again. So that's my take on it, and I would love to hear yours, because I know that this is something that people go through throughout the year. A year is a long time. I don't know anybody that doesn't have something like this happen to them at least once. It's like writer's block, except for listening or reading. It's reader's block. And how do you get through it? And I've seen people talk about this on Twitter as being a thing. And that's another reason that I knew it was something that I wanted to talk about on the show. You can email me or get in touch with me on Twitter. Tell me your story about your slumps and anything that you think is interesting or pertinent to the discussion. I'd love to get a dialogue going on this subject for myself and for other listeners to see how you handle them. And with that having been said, we're going to throw it back to Ken. He's going to talk to you a little bit about this week's release from PDQ that he wants to highlight. After he does that, we're going to come back and we're going to do the Caught My Ear for this week. We actually have a few of them this week. So here's Ken with this week's PDQ release of the week.
Thanks, Casey. With Cuba being in the news lately, I thought this would be an interesting title to highlight this week. It's Bold Venture with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. What do you have when you take Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall and put them in a boat in the steamy waters of Havana, Cuba? You have a bold venture, the stunning radio series starring this real-life pair of lovers who knew how to create a spark both personally and professionally. Bogart is Slate Shannon, a hotelier who owns a boat he calls Bold Venture, and Bacall, as Sailor Duval, is his love interest, Foyle, who joins him on adventures of rescue, intrigue, and crime fighting set against the colorful backdrop that is Cuba as they become detectives for hire. The repartee between Bogey and Bacall is witty and biting as they turn some tongue-in-cheek dialogue into sparkling chemistry that far transcends the script. Each episode ends with a sort of pillow talk where they decompress after their adventure and take stock of where they are with each other and the world. It's a totally charming 2 minutes and shines a light on the spark these two shared as husband and wife. Take a listen to this excerpt from Bold Venture.
Bold Venture. Adventure, intrigue, mystery, romance, starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Together in the sultry setting of tropical Havana and the mysterious islands of the Caribbean. Bold Venture.
You won't regret this, Mr. Shannon. You'll see you won't.
Mr. Shannon hardly ever regrets anything, do you, Slate?
That's because I lead such a clean life.
See what a lucky man you are, Mr. Bullock. Where else could you have found a 100% fellow like Slate here to take you all the way to Key West in his own boat?
I know. Oh, how well I know. Oh, that reminds me. The passage money.
You can pay me when I land you at Key West.
When you do that, you'll get a bonus. Yes, a nice, plump bonus.
Plump, huh? That'll be nice. You're a nice man, Mr. Bullock.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Here, I got the money right here. I'll peel off any part of it. Just say when.
What a big piggy bank you must have robbed, Mr. Bullock.
Huh? Oh, you made a funny.
Did you do that, sailor?
Yes, she did. I've got $50,000 right here in my hand. Oh, piggy bank. Now, just say when, Mr. Shannon.
Well, if it makes you that happy, when?
What did I tell you, Mr. Bullock? You finally found an honest man. You're wonderful, Slate.
Means a lot to you to get to Key West, doesn't it, Mr. Bullock?
Oh, it does. Yes, it does. A man like me, I'm just not cut out for this excitement in Havana. I'm strictly a homebody. Carpet slippers, a pipe, the evening paper, but all of it in English. Something a man can hold on to. Yes, how much farther to your boat, Mr. Shannon?
A couple of minutes. If you're that anxious, you could have taken a plane. One of the crack liners.
I told you, I don't like all those people around me. I paid you enough, didn't I? I'm not paying you to ask silly, personal questions. You're being paid to...
Now, easy, Mr. Bullock. Slate doesn't like it when you go.
Hey! Watch it, sailor. Hey, what's with you guys? You know better than to drive in Havana with your headlights off? You could have...
Keep the mouth polite, friend. All we want is to ask a friendly direction.
Mr. Shannon, look out. They're the men who... The men who...
What do you know? It can still talk. All right, move it, my check. Johnny will be proud, won't he, my chick? Huh?
Yeah, he'll be proud.
Bold Venture almost never made it to air because Bogart resisted at first, not wanting to commit the time needed to be in a studio at a precise day and hour each week to perform a live radio show. A compromise was made to transcribe the show, which means the show was recorded on large vinyl discs and then sent out to various radio stations to be aired at the appropriate hour in their time zone, allowing Bogey and Bacall to pre-record several episodes at a time and not be tied to an on-air schedule. Few dramatic shows of the era were able to create an ambiance of time and place, as does Bold Venture. Scripts by Morton Fine and David Friedkin allowed these two larger-than-life actors to play whimsical versions of themselves to the delight of millions of listeners each week. 78 episodes were produced, but only 56 original episodes remain, and they've been digitally remastered from the transcribed originals. You can get Bold Venture free with a new trial subscription to Audible, or with your membership, it's about half price. It's a great title, it's a great read, it's 56 half-hour episodes. You gotta love it. Just go to audible.com and search for Bold Venture. Back to you, Casey.
And we're back, and I want to thank Ken again for telling us about this week's release from PDQ. Ken, I don't care what everybody else in the world says about you. I think you're all right. You're not the best, but you're all right.
You're fired. I have no choice. You're fired.
Anyway, it's now time for the Caught My Ear segment this week. Last week it was 2, and this week it is actually 3. So by this time next year, the show will be 34 hours long, and it will just be releases that have gotten my attention during a given week. No, actually, I just think that it's appropriate to do 3 this week because 3 titles sort of piqued my interest. One is a new installment in a mystery series that I listened to. One is a biography, and the other is more of a general nonfiction title. That one we will talk about last. We'll start out with the fiction release, the mystery, and it is called Use of Force. It is written by Brad Thor, narrated by Armand Schultz. It is a publication of Simon & Schuster Audio. Comes out on June 27th. Has a 11-hour and 25-minute running time. And it is the latest installment, the 16th novel in the Scot Harvath series that Brad Thor puts out. He puts out one Scot Harvath novel a year, it seems like. And this is the latest in that series. This is one of those series that I started earlier this year. I've only listened to the first book, The Lions of Lucerne. I got that book on sale from Audible earlier this year when they had their first in series sale, and I tried it out and I really dug it, and I thought it was a good book, and so I have the rest of them on my wish list, and this is one of those that the book, from what I'm told, is one where you don't have to really be familiar with the rest of the series to kind of get into it. And I think that's the best kind of series, is the ones where you can pick it up at any point and you're not going to feel lost. Although for some reason I'm still sort of a completist and want to go in order. I did skip around in the Jack Reacher series earlier this year as well. I went from book 3, I finished book 3, and then I went to book 14, I think it was, because book 14 was set in a fictional town in South Dakota, which is where I live, if you don't know. And so I wanted to listen to that. It got my curiosity. So this book is number 16 in Brad Thor's Scot Harvath series. It is called Use of Force. It is the fiction title on my Caught My Ear list this week from Simon & Schuster Audio. And here, reading an excerpt from the book, is Armand Schultz. So here is Use of Force by Brad Thor.
Nevada. 2 days later. Scot Harvath wasn't supposed to be here. The CIA was forbidden to conduct operations inside the United States, especially the kind he was about to undertake. Desperate times, though, called for desperate measures. The 7-day Burning Man event was an extreme week-long summer solstice festival held on a flat prehistoric lake bed 3 hours outside Reno, Nevada. Outrageous costumes were encouraged, as was tasteful nudity. Costumes ran the gamut from Mad Max to Carnival in Rio. As fit as he was, he could have gotten away without wearing much of anything. That wasn't his style, though. It also wouldn't have made sense for his assignment. Instead, the 5'10" Harvath, with his sandy brown hair and his glacier-like blue eyes, wore a Continental Army coat and a full face of Cherokee war paint, obscuring his handsome features. As the wind kicked up again, he pulled a pair of steampunk goggles over his eyes and wrapped a keffiyeh around his face. Clouds of the fine alkaline dust that covered the playa were swirling everywhere. Visibility was dropping. 50 meters, a disembodied voice said over the device pushed deep into his left ear. He kept walking, scanning from left to right. Burning Man took place in a temporary metropolis built in the Black Rock Desert, which was called Black Rock City. With more than 70,000 attendees, BRC was twice as dense as the City of London. Seen from above, the festival was laid out in the shape of a giant letter C, or 2/3 of a circle. It looked like a blueprint for the Death Star, with a good chunk blown away. It was 1.5 miles across, and a 1/4 mile out from the center of the C was the Man, a giant effigy that would be set on fire Saturday night. There were no accommodations in Black Rock City, only what you hauled in and hauled back out yourself. Burners, as attendees were known, spent months in advance planning elaborately themed camps and villages. Only the ultra-rich showed up on day one, usually via helicopter, to luxury turnkey camps that had already been constructed for them. Almost as controversial as the camps of the ultra-rich was something called Kidsville. It was one of the largest camps at Burning Man and was for families with children, an interesting choice at such an adult festival. Nevertheless, this year, there were about 1,000 kids in attendance. An army of volunteers, augmented by private security, had screened each vehicle as it entered the festival. Occasionally, the volunteers were assisted by undercover law enforcement. The massive flow of traffic, in addition to the laid-back atmosphere of the event, made it impossible to do anything thorough. It was more security theater than anything else. Local and state law enforcement patrolled the festival, as did park rangers from the Bureau of Land Management. But as long as you weren't openly doing drugs or providing alcohol to minors, it wasn't difficult to stay off their radar. They had their hands more than full. It was no wonder Burning Man had caught the attention of terrorists. The voice spoke again in Harvath's ear. "You should be able to see it now." He stopped walking, raised a bottle of water to his mouth, and used the opportunity to look around. Banners and tent flaps blew in the wind. There was a makeshift bar called 7 Deadly Gins, something called Camp Woo Woo, another place called No Bikini Atoll, and an enclave named Toxic Disco Clam. Just beyond was the blue RV. "I see it now," said Harvath, tossing the water bottle. "Hey!" a woman behind him complained, but he ignored her and kept moving. He had come too far to let Hamza Rahim escape. Through the dust, the evening air was redolent with the smoke from bonfires and burn barrels. Music thumped from every direction. Hidden out of sight, diesel generators rumbled their low growls, powering turntables, sound systems, and massive light shows. Dancers on the playa spun flaming orbs on long chains. Rolling art exhibits, brightly lit from end to end, spat fire into the night sky. He did a slow loop around the camp that contained the blue RV. Everyone seemed to be congregated in a large tent.
Moving on to our next title. This is a biography. It comes to us courtesy of Hachette Audio. Has a running time of 8 hours and 25 minutes. Is released on June 27th, 2017. It is called But Seriously, and it is written and narrated by John McEnroe. Now, I have to tell you that I am not a big tennis fan. I do love sports, but tennis is not one that I particularly care all that much about. So it's not the fact that this book is by a tennis player that is what caught my ear and what makes this title interesting to me. The fact is that it interests me because this book is by John McEnroe. And John McEnroe is an outspoken athlete, to say the least. Former athlete, now he's a broadcaster, but he is very outspoken, very opinionated, and he has a big personality. And I'm attracted to big personality people in general, be they sports stars or movie stars or musicians or whatever. I'm attracted to the big personality types, the alpha males, so to speak, the people who aren't afraid to make some noise and draw attention to themselves. I'm not saying that I like all of these people, but I'm drawn to them. I'm fascinated by them. And so if one of them puts out a book, I am going to be more apt to listen to it than not. And it just so happens that this one happens to be from a former tennis player, now broadcaster. If he were a musician and was at this outspoken, I would be just as eager to listen to it. This is actually his second book, but to my knowledge, his first biography or autobiography is not available on audio, and that's too bad. But this sounds like a book of just John McEnroe giving his opinions on things, and I'm a fan of that. I will be very eager as well to hear what he sounds like as an audiobook narrator. He's pretty entertaining, so I don't think he'll be much of a problem when it comes to giving a performance as an audiobook narrator. So I'm looking forward to that. It's one that actually, of the 3 books that I've picked this week, you've already heard Use of Force, and we'll get to the other one after this. But of the 3, this one actually caught my attention first. I had this one sort of pegged for this segment when I was first considering what the show was going to be and the different segments. I was browsing the pre-order section and saw this in the sports category on Audible, and I thought, man, the week this comes out, I think I'm going to put it in the show. So this one didn't change. Even as I added the other books to it, I sort of figured that this one would be in there as well, and it never wasn't under consideration for this spot. We're going to go to an excerpt. Again, this comes from Hachette Audio. This is But Seriously, written and narrated by John McEnroe.
Him in mind. Gladys Knight and the Pips, Midnight Train to Georgia. In 2002, when I ended my first book, I was just beginning the process of working out what I was going to do with my life now that I could no longer compete at the highest level as an athlete. Would it still be tennis, playing on the seniors tour, commentating, bit of coaching, or something else like art dealing or TV or film, or something totally different? I had no idea which way my life was heading, but I knew if I wanted to have new experiences that would fire me up the same way being on a tennis court had done, I was going to have to take some major risks. I always needed to feel challenged, to push myself, and I've tried out a lot of different stuff in the intervening 15 years. Some of it's worked and some of it hasn't, but in life as in sport, it's often the big defeats that teach you the most. If you're too scared of falling flat on your ass, you'll never get out of your chair. And I hope that what I've learned from some of the more laughable calamities I'm going to describe has given me a new perspective on the successes that came before. That's why this second book is going to be much more than a chronological record of everything that's happened to me since the last one came out. The same way a tennis match alternates between service games and having to wait on the baseline preparing yourself for what your opponent might throw at you, I'm going to intercut a straightforward account of my life as it's unfolded with stories about the past experiences that made me the person I am today. Hopefully, over the past few years, I've made some progress in grudgingly figuring out how to become a better person. And I'm now known for more than just hitting a tennis ball and getting upset and yelling at linesmen and umpires. But I'll leave that for you to judge. Either way, I'll be dropping so many names in this book it'll make your head spin. Only kidding. Sort of. And the first of those names is my wife's. I've been with the singer Patti Smythe since 1994. We've been married for 20 of those years and are closer now than ever, which I figure is pretty amazing these days. Patti's done so many incredible things for me. not least loving and helping me try to bring up our 6 kids, 3 of them from my first marriage. When my first book came out, the youngest was only 3, the oldest 17. Now they're all grown up. Even the youngest will be off to college soon. We've had some ups and downs between the good times, the same as any family does, but at a point where Patty and I are going to be seeing even more of each other, the fact that I'm looking forward to that is a testament to how much we have in common. And if there's any credit for the faint possibility I might have become a slightly better, less selfish person over the last 20 years or so, the bulk of that should go to Patty. My life was at a low ebb when I met her, and things could have turned out very differently if she hadn't been there to help me through the next few years. She's a very strong character, even more opinionated than me, if that's possible, and probably the only person who can tell me stuff I don't want to hear in such a way that I'll actually listen and take it on board. Okay, maybe not without an argument, but we've learned over the years to listen and to compromise. Sometimes I'll even back down and agree that she's right. I guess it's called getting older and wiser. Since it was kind of the beginning of me becoming who I am now, I wanted to start off by letting her put the record straight, as she sees it, about how we first got together. Even if the differences between her account and the one of my first book aren't as dramatic as she thinks they are, at least this will give the listeners the chance to see what I put up with.
John and I fight constantly about when we first met, and it's a battle that continues, because he tells the story completely differently to how I remember it. Obviously, everyone has their own perspective, and people's memories can play tricks, but he does try to rewrite history. So it'll be good if I can get my version, which of course is 100% the truth, down in print. The funny thing for me was how different our lives were, and yet how much we had in common, not just through the showbiz world we were both involved in, but also because we'd both been brought up in Queens. I traveled the world to meet a guy who grew up 15 minutes from me. There's probably a reason for that, because there is something about the landscape you're raised in. The sights, the sounds, the smells, and ours had been very similar, maybe too similar, to the point where, if we'd met too soon, it might have been a problem. I had seen John once in a club in 1984, right before my album The Warrior came out.
Our final book this week that caught my ear is the one that I think might generate the most controversy amongst listeners to this podcast and audiobook fans in general. It is called The Smear: How Shady Political Operatives and Fake News Control What You See, What You Think, and How You Vote. And it is written and narrated by Cheryl Atkinson. It is 11 hours and 19 minutes long. It is also released on June the 27th, and it comes to us from Harper Audio. This is Cheryl Atkinson's second audiobook, the first being Stonewalled: My Fight for Truth Against the Forces of Obstruction, Intimidation, and Harassment in Obama's Washington, that came out in 2014. Now, a title like that is going to turn off about half the country. When I listened to this book in 2015, a friend of mine noticed it on Goodreads and was asking me about it, and she said, the book sounds interesting, but I'm not really too interested if it's just going to be bashing Obama. And I said, well, that's not really what the book is about. In fact, the book was pretty even-handed. She mentioned scandals in both Republican and Democratic administrations that she has covered. She was an investigative journalist for a long time at CBS until leaving that position a few months before the book came out, and talks a little bit about that as well. But so that book was more even-handed than the title might suggest. And as I pointed out to a friend of mine, or the same friend of mine rather, that discussed the book with me the previous book, Stonewalled, that there's a difference between pointing out the flaws of a person and a person's administration. Certain things could be done in a presidential administration that aren't necessarily at the behest of the president himself or herself, depending. I'm sure there'll be a female president someday, and herself will be just as applicable. But, it's one of those things where not every action that an administration undertakes can necessarily be traced back to the head of it. But this book, The Smear, How Shady Political Operatives and Fake News Control What You See, What You Think, and How You Vote, is interesting because fake news is in the news quite a bit these days, and it has been for about a year now, I would say. And it's funny to me that fake news is all of a sudden a big deal when fake news is nothing new if you really think about it. I always sort of think, back in the day, like in a small town, like maybe in the Old West or whatever, or, even in the earliest days of the country, where you'd have these newspaper men and they'd be like the brother-in-law of the mayor or something, or, there would be some familial tie that would tie the newspaper to maybe the town's largest employer, or some big shot would be friends with the editor of the newspaper. If you don't think that resulted in some slanted coverage even back in the day, I think you probably need to rethink that particular idea. So like the fact that fake news is news now is a little strange to me, because I would argue that, to the extent that fake news is a problem, it's always been a problem, and this is nothing really new. I think that you're just looking for things. Like if fake news is a problem in 2017, and I would say that it probably is, it didn't just become a problem during the last presidential election cycle. That's kind of the point that I'm trying to make. So because I thought Miss Atkinson's first book was pretty even-handed and pretty fair, and it was also pretty interesting, and because I am interested in the topic and fake news in particular, this book caught my ear, and I'm very much looking forward to listening to it. The fact that she narrates it herself is a little different. The narrator for Stonewalled is Laurel Merlington. It will be interesting to hear Cheryl Atkinson narrate her own work this time and see how that's different, if it helps matters or hurts them. You can always go either way when it comes to having authors narrate their own stuff. And I would say of the three that I've mentioned today, Use of Force, The Smear, and But Seriously, this is probably the one that I will get to first. This is probably the one that I will listen to first. I have a certain fascination with media and journalism and government and politics, and this book interests me. Familiarity with the author, that's really the driving force. I don't know that if I hadn't read her previous book, if I would necessarily run to this one right away. The title would have most definitely caught my interest, but I probably would have been more skeptical, because I tend to be skeptical of books like this because I wonder how partisan they are, and I sort of prefer something that's more objective than partisan. And, you never know until you try it in a lot of cases, but familiarity with the author is really why it's here for me this week. And, if I like it, I'll let you know. And if it disappoints me, I'll let you know. And I'll let you know why. And like I said, I enjoyed Stonewalled. At least I thought it was interesting. I learned a few things and thought it was pretty even-handed. So I'm expecting more of the same here. No reason to expect otherwise from me, I guess. But we will wait and see. And right now, we will go to an excerpt from Harper Audio's The Smear, written and narrated by Cheryl Atkinson.
As vicious as our modern politics are, they aren't the beginning of the smear. To understand the tricks of the trade and how they figure into attempts to manipulate your opinion, it helps to examine how we got here. It turns out smears are a tradition in American politics dating back to our earliest days. In fact, our founding fathers knew very well the power of a sharp character assassination. Hamilton and Jefferson were planting stuff on each other's sex lives and writing anonymously for their partisan newspapers, says Professor Mark Feldstein of Philip Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland. He's an avid student of historical scandal. Back in the 1790s, the efforts were relatively unsophisticated, he tells me. In those days, it was kind of obvious who was behind the smears because the first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, had this sexual affair with a woman named Maria Reynolds, and Thomas Jefferson published it, and Jefferson was banging Sally Hemings, and it was the Hamilton paper that surfaced it, says Feldstein. While rumor and innuendo have long been the bedrock of political assaults, I think you could say the modern smear came into its own during World War II. And it's only natural that the U.S. intel agency responsible for perfecting psychological warfare and propaganda techniques became accomplished in the art of the smear. Back then, they called it morale operations. In 1943, the U.S. Morale Operations Branch opened under the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. The mission? Misinformation and deception. The tools? White, black, and gray propaganda, all still widely used by today's players in the smear game. White propaganda openly reveals its source and relies on gentle persuasion and public relation techniques. Black propaganda is misinformation that claims to be coming from one side, but is actually produced by the opposing side. Then there's gray propaganda, which the CIA considers the most mysterious of all because the source of the propaganda is never identified. Relate that idea to today's political dark money groups, which don't have to disclose who their donors are. The CIA also knows that when demoralization and demonization are the order of the day, nothing does the trick like a good old-fashioned rumor. To paraphrase an historic figure, a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on. During World War II, the Morale Operations Branch initiated about 20 rumors per week. They were typically short, memorable stories concerning famous people and events meant to cause fear, confusion, and distrust. Success was measured by comebacks, the number of times the rumors surfaced in the press. In addition to using word of mouth and the press to deploy rumors and other forms of propaganda against the Nazis, the government's secret operators had another first-rate device at their disposal: radio. The Morale Operations Branch used black propaganda radio stations to broadcast disinformation on behalf of the United States and its allies. In 1944, the gray propaganda radio station Soldatensender, or Soldiers Radio, went live in England, denouncing the Nazis amid news, music, and entertainment. American movie stars took part in musical black ops on Soldatensender. According to the CIA, Bing Crosby, Dinah Shore, and Marlene Dietrich performed black propaganda lyrics written for German and American songs. One instance involved a tune called Lily Marlene. It's a nostalgic, pessimistic melody. Adolf Hitler's chief propagandist, Joseph Goebbels, considered it demoralizing and banned it in Germany. Outside the barracks, by the corner light, I'll always stand and wait for you at night. Despite the ban, Dietrich recorded the song in German and English, and it was played on Soldatensender, which German troops could hear. The idea was to make them homesick. It worked. Meantime, Goebbels was busy perfecting textbook propaganda techniques of his own that also stand the test of time today. As head of Hitler's Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda from 1933 to 1945, Goebbels was obsessed with controlling virtually every form of message in German society, whether from government, churches, films, reporters, or mass media. Obsessive control was necessary to lead the German...
And we are back, and it is now time to wrap up the show for this week. I want to again mention the fact that you can head over to facebook.com/talkingaudiobooks. You hit the like button on that page, and you can be entered into the July giveaway contest for 4 promo codes from Audible. No, it isn't quite as good as the 6 promo codes we offered in the month of June, but 4 is still nothing to sneeze at. Depending upon your Audible plan, 4 promo codes could have as much of a value as $60 if you have the $14.95 gold monthly plan. That means that each of these 4 credits would be worth $14.95. So 4 would be worth $59.80. Like I said, nothing to sneeze at. And even if you have the yearly plan where your average credit cost is $9.56 like mine plus tax, then your total is, or your value, it's still going to be like $40. So 4 credits is nothing to sneeze at, and you can use them on anything you want, and it couldn't be simpler to enter. Just hit the like button on the facebook.com/talkingaudiobooks page, and you are good to go. The time frame for that will end on July 31st. I'm giving away 4 credits, not the 241 I teased earlier. That was just to see if Ken was paying attention. You never know what that guy could do.
You're fired. I have no choice. You're fired.
So it's got to keep him on the ball every now and again. But enter that giveaway. Thank you for listening. I think this has been a good show. I think this was a good topic. This is one where I would very much love to hear from you as to your reaction to it and your ideas and your suggestions on breaking a listening slump, or tell us about some of your memorable slumps if you've had them, and how you know one is coming, when you realized you've hit one, just anything like that. The reason that I say I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say about that is, yes, I say every week that I'm interested in hearing your answers to these questions, but this is one of those things that's a little bit more universal, because the spectrum of tastes is so diverse when it comes to listening. One person's narrator with a great voice is another person's turnoff because of a bad voice. Someone likes science fiction, someone else would flee from the room before listening to sci-fi. Someone loves nonfiction, someone never reads nonfiction. Someone is a big mysteries fan, someone could care less. Someone wants true life and real biographies and things like that. Some people like true crime, and some people have no interest. There's so many different tastes, and taste is not universal, but the thought of a slump or potential burnout or whatever, that is something that's more relatable to more people, and that's why I'd love to hear your comments on it. I want to quickly mention that next week on the show, we will be talking about my progress through the first half of the year, listening-wise. I'll show you just how obsessed with stats and numbers I can be, and you're going to have a lot of fun with that, I hope. And I will be interested to know your progress as well through the first half of the year. Halfway point, as I said, is sometime July 2nd, so that will be next week's show. Before I go, I want to wish everyone in Canada a happy Canada Day. Canada Day is July the 1st. I know that for a couple reasons, not the least of which is the fact that my cousin Kayla lives in Canada with her husband, who is a native Canadian, and their young son. So I know it for that reason, but that's not the only reason I know it. So happy Canada Day to all of the Canadian listeners to the podcast. To those of you in the United States listening, I hope you have a safe and happy 4th of July, however you choose to celebrate. Be careful with the fireworks. Fire is dangerous, even when you're just trying to use it for fun. Bad things can still happen, so be safe and take every precaution. Eat plenty of hot dogs and hamburgers and whatever else. Just enjoy your 4th of July celebration. And if you are not in Canada or in the United States, just have a good week. And we'll talk to you next week on the Talking Audiobooks podcast. Until then, keep listening.
For you, the listeners of the Talking Audiobooks podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/talking audiobooks. Again, that's audibletrial.com/talking audiobooks for your free audiobook. Talking Audiobooks is a trademark of Kenjoy Media, produced by Kenjoy Media, copyright 2017, all rights reserved. Your host has been Casey Trowbridge, produced by Kenjoy, theme music composed by Christian Anderson, licensed through epidemicmusic.com. Visit our website at talkingaudiobooks.com, follow us on Twitter at Talking Audio, follow us on Facebook at Talking Audiobooks, and subscribe to the Talking Audiobooks YouTube channel. Here's a disclaimer. Various sponsors like Audible.com help make this podcast possible. However, they are not responsible for its content. They don't dictate what we talk about or what books we share with you, and therefore the opinions that you hear on here are unfortunately those of the host and our guests. We'd love to hear from you, so email us at feedback@talkingaudiobooks.com. Tell us what audiobooks you're listening to, what you've liked in the past, narrators that you like. Ask us questions, anything. It's for your feedback. Feedback@talkingaudiobooks.com. That's it. See you next time on Talking Audiobooks.